and welcome back to another edition of Night Rider. We've changed studios a little bit here, hopefully to improve audio quality and hopefully to improve your overall experience and time here. If you are new to the Night Rider series, what we do here is we slow down, we get a little bit more philosophical, and we have some long form conversation and some long form talking. So if you're into that, buckle up, hang out. If that's not your bag, well then, I don't think this video is for you. You probably saw how long it was before you clicked on it. So, I mean, I'm assuming that you kind of know what you're in for. So, I've been thinking about this for about, I don't know, week, 2 weeks, a while now, and I thought it was time that we talked about it. So, I was thinking about the hurricane, the Helene, not the one that's just hitting as the time I'm filming this, which was, I don't know, it started with an M. But the one that caused all the flooding in North Carolina, Tennessee. That's my phone. Please ignore that. Turn those dings off because that's kind of annoying. Maybe I'll put this on silent mode. Just hang on. There we go. And so I was thinking about that, as I'm sure a lot of you have been. And a lot of you either lived there or volunteered there or, had something involved with that, right? And I was thinking about the government response to the hurricane. And there's a lot we could say about that. So the first thing, that I was thinking about was the lack of response, right? So at first, the question was, well, where's FEMA? It was days. There was this clip of the president, Biden, who I think is still the president, at least still pretends to be as far as I can tell. When they asked him, what do you think about the storm? And he's like, what storm are you talking about? There's a lot going on right now. And it's like, I don't know, man. The one that's affected millions of Americans and killed thousands of people. I don't know. Okay, I don't know if the death toll's up to the thousands, but it's pretty bad, right? I don't know what the death toll is at this point, but again, not good. And, millions, probably closer to billions of dollars of destruction, Anyway, president, of course, clueless, but that should be no surprise if you've been following that for a while. And then, so there's that. That's an issue, right? And then there's the issue of when FEMA finally did get there, right? Well, I guess the other issue was So FEMA is under the Department of Homeland Security. Okay, if you don't know that, that's what they're under. We'll do a separate video at some point where I get the whiteboard out and explain the alleged authority path, right? But essentially, FEMA, of course, is constitutionally defunct, shouldn't exist, a horrible organization, etc., etc. We'll different video. But for today's purposes, right, they're under Homeland Security, and the Secretary of Homeland Security, it said at one point that, they don't have enough money for hurricane season, despite just months ago saying that they're prepared for hurricane season and having all the money. And so people started doing some digging, and they're like, well, where'd all the money go? And it turns out that the Department of Homeland Security spent billions, I believe it's billions with a B, of dollars to help relocate illegal immigrants within the United States. The Department of Homeland Security spent billions of dollars to relocate illegal immigrants in the United States. And they pulled from FEMA's budget, which was a disaster recovery organization that's an organization that exists to help Americans recover from disasters. And they took that money and spent it on people who are illegal aliens to settle them in the country. And you're like, man, that's pretty bad. But then it just keeps getting worse, doesn't it? Because FEMA finally does show up to North Carolina, Tennessee area. And then all the reports start coming out about how they're confiscating supplies, how they're blocking volunteers, how they're not being helpful. Like, all these things start coming out about how they are preventing aid from getting to people. And they're going to like churches and drop-off points, and they're confiscating supplies. I just call that stealing. Because they're not FEMA approved. They're wanting to show up and give people training in order to volunteer and get the help done, and like really trying to like kind of clamp down on this whole thing and say, hey, we're gonna be the ones who, you know, provide the authority, oversight, tyranny. It kind of made me think of Chernobyl on HBO. If you've ever seen the HBO Chernobyl show, right? When like the nuclear reactor melts down and there's radiation everywhere, and you know it's a disaster, and the government's like, we're gonna fix this, and they like prevent anybody from leaving the area, right? So more people get infected, like they increase the damage, right? And pretty bad. It's like, oh, it's the USSR, it's under communism, it's pretty awful, right? But then here you say the same thing. And then to twist the knife in there, to really twist it in there, a couple days later, I don't know, a week, 10 days, something like that. I can't remember the exact time. You can go find the tweet. I'm sure it's still up. The Vice President, Kamala Harris, who's running for president now, tweets out of the official account that they are sending another like $8 billion to some foreign country. It wasn't Ukraine or Israel this time. It was somewhere else. Because they're, she's seen their plight and their misery, and they're so hurt. And I need to find it now, just so I can read this to you. Man, where did I put that? Let's see if I can find it quick. I don't think I'll be able to, but if I can, I'm going to cut it back in here if I find it later. But she tweets out this thing, right? That they're going to give billions of dollars to these other people who are suffering because of their plight and their whatever. And this is after Homeland Security has established that, FEMA has said they don't have money. This is after they didn't show up. This is after they showed up and then were incompetent and caused more problems. Like the whole disaster. I think people were going to get like a $750 loan. I don't know if it was a loan, but $750 might be a loan. I don't even know. Complete and utter disaster, right? But they're going to give billions of dollars away to some foreign country that most Americans can't even find on a map because they're suffering. You know how long it would take you to count to 1 billion? I mean, just 1 billion. Like if you counted like at the rate of like 1 second, like 1, 2, 3, and each of those is a second, right? To count to 1 million takes you something like a month. To count to 1 billion takes something like 32, 33 years. Just think about that. Think about how big 1 billion is. And if we're donating, I think the number was 8. I want to say it's 8 if memory serves correct. $8 billion to some other place in the world. Like you conceivably, if you were to count, you won't live 8 billion seconds in your life. You know what I mean? Like that you're not going to live that long. But we can just write a check for that amount of money send that far off somewhere on the other side of the world. She's tweeting this in the middle of the disaster. And you look at all that, and there's really only one conclusion you can draw. I think, reasonably, looking at the evidence, these people hate you. I mean, I don't know what else that would mean or what that would be, right? Like I don't know how else you could get in there. And then I started thinking, you know, this isn't the first time that we've witnessed the government actively restraining people trying to help, right? And what I'm talking about here is like the volunteers showed up. I mean, volunteers came in from all over the place, right? And we're trying to assist and help and trying to, you know, provide rescue and just to like bring supplies to people who were stranded. Because when these floods came through, right, like it cut off a bunch of areas and just completely washed out roads and like, you know, blew debris over roads and just made some areas unreachable. So some of these people are stranded, you know, without food and water in these places, right? And so these people are trying to run supply convoys into these areas to bring in, you know, food and water so people don't die, you know, of starvation or dehydration, which will get you first, right? And, you know, FEMA's actively out there trying to prevent people from doing that, confiscating, I keep putting it in quotes because, again, it's just stealing the supplies, right? Because they're not, you know, FEMA approved or whatever red tape government bureaucracy garbage that they're going to come up with, right? And this isn't the first time in my lifetime that I can think of the government actively preventing good. I'm sure there are other examples. But the other example that I thought of that was the most clear in my mind was at the school shooting in Texas. I don't know how to pronounce this city. Uvalde? I honestly don't know how to pronounce it. I've only ever read it. So if you know what I'm talking about, good. If you're like, I'm sure you can correct my pronunciation. Maybe you can type it out there, helpful for me. But if you remember that one, that was the one where the cops were in the building for like an hour and did nothing. It's the one where when they posted the video, they put a little text at the bottom that said, "The sounds of screaming children have been removed," right? I mean, like they're standing like literally like 30, 50 feet down the hallway while the guy's in the room murdering people and kids are screaming and dying. And there's like 10 cops stacked up doing nothing while people are dying, right? Which is horrible and really bad. But the worst part of that whole story was there were parents outside the school trying to get inside the school, and they were being arrested. So you're outside the school, there's a shooter in there killing kids, maybe your kid. You're trying to go in there to stop them. And not only are the cops not stopping the shooter, but they're arresting you. If there are cops outside the building where there's still an active shooter, right, the question is, well, why? What are you doing out here? You should be in there killing the bad guy. So I'm going to go in there and do it. No, sir. We have to let him keep killing. We're going to arrest you for attempting to go in to stop the bad guy. You're going to be arrested and charged with a crime. The shooter gets to keep killing kids. Actively restraining good, right? So there's the Uvalde school deal, the Hurricane Helene. And I think the longer we go here, the more and more examples of this we're going to see, where a government is actively preventing good. And then on the flip side of that, and this is pretty easy to see everywhere else, right? They're actively rewarding evil, right? Easy example is like illegal immigration, right? Well, you know, you're an illegal immigrant, no problem. You're going to come on in. We're going to make sure you can be employed by a police department, right? What was it? Minneapolis just hired their first non-citizen police officer. Both in Washington and California, as far as I know, you can be an illegal immigrant and be a police officer. You're going to get a house loan. In some cases, a optional payback house loan. So free money to buy a house. You're going to get, $10, $20, $30,000 of food stamps, EBT. You know what I mean? And so we're going to set you up with a place to live, with money. We'll hire you into official government jobs. And we'll reward you for illegally trespassing into our country while we punish the people and refuse to help the people that paid for that to be possible. Right? Like, I mean, if that's not evil, I don't know what else you call that. Like, I'm trying to think. Like, imagine reading about this in a history book, right? Like, some government, had some citizens, and what they did is they used all of the funds they collected from those citizens to pay mercenaries to come in and wipe them out and then take over their city. You'd think, oh, that's crazy, right? Let's just say there's a king of some little small fiefdom, some lord, whatever. And for whatever reason, he decides he doesn't like his peasants anymore. He doesn't like any of them, And so what he does is he collects all the taxes one year, right? He goes out and hires a Viking mercenary band, has them come in and kill everybody, and then stays there and resettles the land, right? And so they're no longer the Picts. If you don't know who that is, tribe in England when the Romans first came up. Right now they're Anglo-Saxon, right? You'd read that and you'd say, man, that's pretty evil. Like, you had them pay for their own death, and then you had the people come in and kill them on purpose just to wipe them out. That's pretty bad, right? Like, you'd say it's pretty evil. And I don't know how we're not seeing that on just a larger scale, really. Now, you can say, well, Dylan, it's not a coordinated effort. I mean, all those examples you're citing, those are different states and municipalities making those decisions and making those laws. And, that's not all like a central evil. And I would say, okay, even if that is true, which maybe on some corners you could argue that's the case, there's still a very clear federal effort to import as many illegal aliens as possible. I mean, that's been pretty clear since this last administration, right? Like, I mean, Trump couldn't even get a wall through, right? He was fought tooth and nail for them to build a border wall. What is a nation without a border? It's not just an economic zone, like some kind of economic anarchy zone. Like, it's not, without a border, it's not a nation. I don't know what you call that, but it's not a nation. So, anyway, you say, oh, it's all just different. It's all, the individual groups and individual cities. And, there's no coordinated effort here, Dylan. You're crazy. I would say, okay, does that make it better? Does that somehow make it less evil? Does that somehow make it morally okay to actively reward evil and actively punish good? Like, make it make sense. Make it okay. I'm genuinely trying to think this through. I don't know what the argument would be that would make that acceptable, that would make it okay. Like I said, I'm trying to think, and I can't think of anything that would make that legitimate. It's easy to look back in history and you look at Stalin and his purges and his gulags, or Hitler and his death camps, and the Mongols and their rampant destruction. like it's easy to look back at all these things and say, ooh, that was bad, that was evil. You know, that was, ooh, shouldn't do that, right? Like it's so easy to recognize theoretical evil when you're removed from it. You know, when the story's being told to you after the fact, and the die has been cast, the characters have been cast, maybe is what I'm trying to say, right? And we've framed them a certain way, and we've brought them to you a certain way. It's real easy to look back and say, oh, well, you know, bad guy, don't want to be a bad guy, right? Oh, I would have known better, right? I would have stood up against the evilness, right? But then those same people went out and got the triple jab, reported their neighbors for stepping outside their house, right? It's so easy to understand it when it's a story being told to you. When you're living in the midst of the story, though, and you're a character that people will read about later in history, then it gets a little fuzzier, doesn't it? Then it gets a little bit more interesting. And I think it becomes harder to see the evil, or maybe not harder to see it, because I think, you know, if you're paying attention at all, like this should be pretty clear to you. But it becomes harder to recognize it. I don't know what quite the word is that I'm looking for here, but there's something about it, ladies and gentlemen. I don't understand why necessarily. Maybe it's just cowardice. Maybe it's just denial. Maybe you just don't want to understand the times you're living in, or the evil being purposefully, intentionally brought against you. Maybe you, like, you know, boomers, God bless them. You know, my parents are boomers, right? Like, that whole generation, most of them don't understand, like, legitimately in their brain, it's not clicking that the America they grew up in is gone, like forever gone. Like, they don't get it, you know? My dad, even when I was growing up as a kid, would tell me stories of, like, him being able to walk down Franklin Avenue in Minneapolis, which Franklin Avenue, super bad part of town, was when he was a kid, even was a bad part of town, by himself when he's like 6 years old, right? And no one was worried. It wasn't a big deal. Could do that. You can't do, you know, he couldn't do that when I was a kid. You surely can't do it now. But like, that America's gone forever, right? The social cohesion completely removed, and they just don't have the, like, ability. I just think, like, they emotionally can't reckon with the fact that it's gone forever, and because that takes some courage, and that takes some gumption, and that takes some grieving, and so, you know, they don't, like, it won't click, right? But like I said, like, this is where we live. This is the time that we live in, right? Where the government is purposefully rewarding evil and purposely restraining good. And unless some things radically change, like, for example, you know, I think Elon Musk is going to work with Trump if Trump gets in, right? And I saw something the other day where Elon Musk said he'd fire 80% of the federal government. And I thought, one, my life would be no different after you did that, so that'd be cool. Two, that'd be good. I'd be excited about that. Three, unintentionally, that would probably, I wouldn't say tank the economy, but it would definitely have some economic impact, which would be interesting. Because last I knew, 1 in 5-ish people work for the federal government, right? And that's not counting companies that exist to just, like, basically contract with the government, right? So I don't know what that would do, but I'll roll those dice, right? Because it's only going to get worse. So unless something like drastic like that happens, austere, You know what I mean? 80% of the federal government, gone, fired, you know. We're going to fire everyone from the FBI and bulldoze the building and salt the earth. And we're going to do the same with the Department of Education. And we're going to do the same with, you know, there's like 500 different agencies we could list there, right? Like that would be pretty cool. We'd be well on our way then, right? But that's, I mean, think about it. Can you imagine anybody doing that at this stage in the game? I mean, I can't, to be honest with you. Would love to see it happen, wouldn't complain. We can hope. I'm just saying that kind of austere, intense action is what would be required to turn the ship around at this point. Because the natural propensity of the system, it has momentum, right? And as it continues to reward evil, punish good, and it continues to get away with it, I just think that that's going to go somewhere bad. Somewhere not very exciting. So I guess I just invite you to think about that, right? And think about like the time you live in, where you are, and at what stage of decline are we in here? And I would say we're at the stage where, like I said, to beat a dead horse here, evil's being rewarded, good is being punished. And my basic framework for how government should work is that governments are designated by God to punish evil and reward good. That is the literal biblical purpose of government. Romans 13:4 for my Jesus bros, okay? That's why God has instituted governments among men, to punish evil and to reward good. That is the baseline thing that government is supposed to do. Punish evil, reward good. And I'm not talking about evil like worshiping different gods, although that's bad, you shouldn't do that. I'm talking about stuff like murder, stealing, right? Like clear violations of other human beings' sanctity. Like even the government of Rome, for most of its history, was pretty good at that. You know, they were pagan, right? But like for most of the time, they did a pretty good job of punishing evil, rewarding good. And that's, we should thank God for a government like that, right? But we now live in a time where our government doesn't do that. In fact, it not only doesn't do it, but it does the opposite. So there's like different stages of decline. If a great government is, in general, they're punishing evil and they're rewarding good, you want to live there, right? And then the next stage is, will they stop doing one or both of those things, right? That's somewhere in the middle. And then over here, you have rewarding evil and punishing good. And I'm saying we're all the way on the edge of this decline cycle here. At least again, from what I can observe and from what I can tell where we're at now. I'm open to disagreement on this. And again, I don't know where you're going to point to say, well, no, Dylan, you're incorrect based on this, and the other thing. Excuse me. But I just think that's where we're at. So, knowing you live in that time, knowing that it's for the foreseeable future going to continue down that path, and we don't necessarily know where that ends or how that works, and there's like 15 different ways that could go. You know, both historically speaking from historical examples and just no one knows the future, you know. I tend to think that the federal government will kind of collapse under its own weight and things will just dissolve. Sorry, apparently this camera has a timeout limit. I didn't know that, so my recording timed out. So, current theory, not sure where I got cut off there. The United States will just dissolve, right? Federal government will collapse under its own weight. Things will just kind of dissolve, and from there we'll rise from the ashes. Current theory, don't know. Could happen different. But knowing that you live in this time, what now? What are you going to do now? And so I would tell you the same thing that I think we're all saying these days, which is have friends, right? Train hard. Try to be as self and community sustaining as you're able to, right? If you got a neighbor down the street and they make honey and you do eggs, you can do a little swap-a-roo or whatever. If you got a local farmer that you can buy raw milk from rather than getting it from the store, go to the local guy, right? Because that's a more sustainable, closer to home source that you can continue to get it from, right? As things outside continue to go bad. If my milk is sourced 25 miles down the street versus 1,500 miles away, it's brought in by a truck, right? We see which one of those is going to be harder to cut off to me, right? All the stuff. I think you guys know the answer at this point. I just think having that philosophical understanding of kind of where we're at and the stage of decline, I hope would motivate you. I hope would help wake you up to the level. Maybe you need to share this video with someone and be like, hey man, or hey wife, I love you, wake up. Like this is where we're at, right? Regardless, I think you're going to need to continue to do brave deeds and endure. We'll see you next time.